Hey, today I'm going to talk you through all the books I read in April. If you're new here, I'm Katie and I'm a final year student at Cardiff University. I know this video is a bit late, but I've been finishing off my final assignments for uni. They're all done now, so I'm hoping that I can be more present on YouTube from now on. So let's get into talking about the books I read this April. So let's start off with my monthly stats. So in April I read 10 books in total and 6 of them were borrowed from my online library. Obviously, as COVID is going on at the moment, I can't go to the actual library, so I've been downloading books just because it's cheaper than buying them myself. I read a total of 4,089 pages this month, which is the most I've read by about 1,000 pages so far this year, so I'm pretty proud of myself. So let's get talking about the books I actually read. The first book I read was The Little Snake by A.L. Kennedy. This was a middle grade, which I don't tend to read a lot of, but I really enjoyed this book. I found it quite a light but thoughtful read. It didn't take me long to read. As you can see, it's really not that thick. I'd describe it as a fantasy dystopian novel. It's about a little girl called Mary and the snake she befriends that she calls Lanmo, and it follows the two of them's friendship from when she was a little girl until she's probably about a teenager, and through the war that her country is facing. It's definitely a character-driven novel rather than a plot-driven novel, but I just found it really heartwarming overall. I really felt like the characters connected. I gave this book a 4.5 star rating and would definitely recommend it, especially if you want. And I would definitely recommend it if you like middle grade and want a kind of like light pick-me-up to read. So the second book I read was Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Now this is the 5th book in the Harry Potter series. If you haven't watched any of my book or reading videos before, then you won't know that I'm 22 and until this year I had never read any of the Harry Potters. So this year I thought it was about time I tried to read them. I'm actually planning on making a full video after I have finished the last one about my thoughts and the experience I had reading Harry Potter for the first time at the age of 22, so if you do want that video, do let me know in the comments down below. I don't really think that the Harry Potter books need any explanation, so I'm just going to give you the star rating that I gave this book instead of telling you what happened in it, because I think everyone has read it apart from me. And I really enjoyed this one, so I actually gave it a 4.5 stars. Again, the next book I borrowed from my library, so I don't physically have it with me here, but it was Then She Vanishes by Clare Douglas. This is a thriller come mystery novel. I actually feel like most thriller novels I've ever read fall in the mystery section as well. So I actually never heard of Clare Douglas before. I downloaded this book based on just the description alone on the library website, and I really wasn't disappointed. The story centers around 2 women who were friends, like very good friends in high school, but have since fallen out and led separate lives up until this point. I would say the main character is Jess, and she's a journalist, and she comes back into contact with her old friend through a case that she's working on, that she's reporting on. The plot actually switches between the girl's childhood and the present day, and it also switches between which character is narrating the story. And although that sounds a bit confusing, it actually really worked in this novel and it was really easy to follow along. But basically, the story that Jess is investigating brings the 2 girls back together, and it also brings up an old mystery that hadn't been solved from their childhood. This book I really couldn't put down even when it was at night, and there were some scary bits in it, so I definitely recommend reading this if you're into thriller mystery books. And I actually gave this book 5 stars, and that was the only 5-star rating that I gave in the month of April. So the 4th book I read was Call It What You Want by Brigid Kemmerer. I have been a fan of Brigid Kemmerer ever since I read Letters to the Lost, which I absolutely loved. And I actually have this book on pre-order, and I actually got like a book, one of the book plates signed with my pre-order. Although it came out last year and I was really excited to read it, I had not gotten around to reading it until April. Now this is a YA romance, and YA romances are definitely my favourite genre. And this is a love story between 2 pretty much lost teens. It's between Megan and Rob. Now Rob's dad, we discover at the beginning of the book, is basically locked in. He doesn't have locked in syndrome, but it's something similar, and throughout the book you kind of discover how that came to be. And then Megan is also facing some troubles with her family life, as well as with a past action that she did that has kind of given her a bad reputation, without spoiling it too much. And this actually is centered around possibly one of my favorite tropes in YA literature, and that is that the pair are put together for a school project and so have to spend time with each other outside of school, which is not something that they necessarily would have done had it not been for the school project, because they're in different social circles, they're two very different people. And although I'd say that that trope is pretty predictable, I think that Brigid Kemmerer has done this really well. I really enjoyed this book, and I think even if you're not the biggest fan of like school project tropes, if you are a fan of YA romance, I do think that you'll enjoy this book. I think that there was a lot of character progression throughout the novel, and the connection between the two main characters felt very genuine and very real to me, and that's why I really enjoyed it. And I gave this book a 4-star rating. So the next book is another borrow from my library, and that is Juliet and Romeo by David Hewson. And no, I have not got that the wrong way around. This is a novel retelling of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet play, and the description promised a twist. Romeo and Juliet is perhaps one of my favourite pieces of literature. I'm not quite sure why I'm so drawn to it, but I absolutely love it. So any retelling I'm kind of like eager to get my hands on, to see how it can be, you know, translated into a different story than the original, if that makes sense. I felt because this was written as a novel rather than the original play, it gave a bit more insight into the protagonists and also into the characters surrounding the protagonists. Now, although the description of this book advertises like a twist, I thought that it was a very standard retelling. Obviously there were extra things added in to make it like lengthy enough to be a novel, but I just didn't feel like there was any switches up until I got to the end, and I knew that there was going to be the twist at the end. It's kind of predictable. When there's a retelling of a story that you love, I feel like there's an outcome that you're hoping for in the retelling, if that makes sense. You're like hoping for a specific twist, and the twist that I was hoping for definitely didn't happen, and I was definitely disappointed with what the spin was at the end. And I can't really say much more without ruining it, but yeah, I was a little bit disappointed at the end. But I still think it was well written, and up until that point I was enjoying it, so I'm giving this book a 4-star rating. The 6th book I read was Gossip Girl by Cecily von Ziegesar? I'm not entirely sure how to say her name, but if you're not familiar with Gossip Girl, it follows a group of very privileged, rich teens in New York. This was actually an interesting read for me because I've never picked up the Gossip Girl books before. I have, however, watched the series multiple times, so I was looking to see how it paired up with the TV series. And I'd actually describe the books as YA humour. I'm not sure I'd describe it as either love or coming of age. I think it is intended to be humour. I might be wrong, correct me if you think differently, but that is how I interpreted it. I read the whole of this book in a couple of hours. It was really short, and as it was written for like a young audience, it was very simply written. It was very easy to read. If you want a synopsis of this book, basically go and watch the first episode of Gossip Girl. It was pretty much on par, the same. There was only a few minor details that were different. I'm not gonna lie and say that this was a quality book, because it definitely wasn't, but as someone who liked watching Gossip Girl when they were a teenager, I did enjoy it and it did humour me. And I do plan on reading the rest of the books. Simply, I don't really know why. It was entertaining. It was entertaining, and I am interested to see how well it lines up with the TV show going forward. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this book, but I did give it 3 stars. I think I was feeling generous. The next book is Isla and the Happily Ever After by Stephenie Perkins. This is another YA romance, and I actually picked this book up not last Christmas, but the Christmas before in my local charity shop. As I'd picked it up in a charity shop, I didn't actually realise that this was the 3rd book in a series, but I don't think that mattered because it was an entirely new story of its own, and the only crossover between the other books that I can tell is that some of the characters that are the supporting roles have been the main character in previous books. This follows the relationship between Isla and Josh, who are two American teens living at a boarding school in Paris. The pair seem to go through a lot of ups and downs in this book, but they have their cute romantic moments nonetheless. One thing I really enjoyed about this book was the portrayal of Isla's best friend, who is autistic. I think the author was really careful in a way to present the best friend in a way that kind of destigmatized autism, and I think that's something that needs to be put more in media that's intended for young adults and children. And I really enjoyed this book, and overall I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read was The Kissing Booth by Beth Reekles, and if you haven't seen a pattern so far, you'll see that I just really like YA romance. And again, this is something that I had watched the film on Netflix and I really liked the film, so I thought I might as well read the book as it was in my library. Now, I did like this book a lot, but I will say that it's set in California, and Beth Reekles herself, I think, is Welsh. Having lived in California for 5 months, which isn't a long time, but still, you can tell it wasn't written by someone that has lived there and hasn't fully experienced that lifestyle, if that makes sense. Some stuff was just very un-American and other stuff was just very highly stereotypical, and I felt like there needed to be a better balance between the two. But I guess it is quite difficult to write accurately about somewhere where you haven't lived. Like this, it was a really sweet book about first love and not necessarily believing in the stereotypes about the people around us. I will say that this book actually felt like it took me forever to read compared to other things in the same genre, and I'm not entirely sure why that was. And although it had its faults, I did also give this book a 4-star rating. The next book I read was The Restaurant at the End of the Universe, which is somewhere in here, which is in this big book. Anyway, my boyfriend got me this for my birthday back in January, and it has all 5 of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books. So The Restaurant at the End of the Universe was the second one in the series, and the series is kind of like a weird sci-fi series, and this particular book was, among other things, it was about a restaurant that kind of tipped back and forth between present day and the end of the universe. As I said, it's weird and there is no way I can explain it in any way that will make it make sense or do justice to the story. So far I say that the books within this huge book are pretty short, they're very futuristic and funny, and they're very light-hearted, so if you want a quick read that's funny, then I definitely recommend this. And I gave this a 3.5-star rating. Now, the final book I read in April was Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. As I said before, I haven't read the Harry Potters before, so this was my first time reading this one. And although the books get longer as you go throughout the series, I'm not necessarily a big fan of long books. I like kind of this length books. I did really enjoy this one, and I actually found myself finishing it quicker than the previous book. So I guess for some reason I was a bit more engaged with this one, and I gave this book a 4-star rating. That completes all the books I read in April. I managed to read 1 more book in April than I did in March, so I'm happy with that. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of my future videos. If you have any videos you would like to see from me specifically, please leave them in the comments down below. I'm taking any ideas people have for videos at the moment. I will see you in my next video.